Basically the same video as yesterday but for teams instead of players. 7 great trophyless seasons from great teams. Let's roll on. Number 7, Chelsea 2021-2022. Chelsea Football Club the previous season, after changing managers halfway and hiring Thomas Tuchel, went on a mad unbeaten run in the league while making 2 cup finals and winning one of them, the big one. And considering the manager then actually had a full transfer window to work on his team, strengthened in the one position people perceived them to be relatively weak in, and strengthened in the form of possibly the most informed striker in the world at the time in Romelu Lukaku, many people, including myself, actually had them down as favourites to win the league in 21-22. But nope, they finished 3rd. But let's be fair, they were really unlucky in every cup competition they played, losing dramatically in extra time against Real Madrid in the UCL quarters and 2 penalty shootouts to Liverpool in the domestic finals. Again, small margins. And yes, that is indeed going to be a running theme in this video too. It's football after all. Number 6, Arsenal 2007-2008. So one of the sides I spoke about in my 7 overrated seasons from great teams was Manchester United 07-08. I mentioned stuff like how they were very lucky in some games, weren't as dominant as they were the year before and all that. One thing I didn't mention and probably should have mentioned though is that these guys weren't even on track to win the league until like the last 2 months or so. And while it was Chelsea who pushed them to the final game day, for the majority of that season it was Arsenal who led the charge. They topped the Premier League table for about 70% of that season, losing the least amount of games in the Premier League that season, with all 3 of their losses coming in very narrow and hard-fought affairs. Not to mention they also made it to the semi-final of the League Cup and quarter-finals of the Champions League, beating AC Milan on the way in the latter competition. And you know what the best part of all that is? They did all that with this team. And look, maybe I'm being a little harsh. This side isn't all that bad. But come on, no way did anyone expect these men to give even Chelsea a good goal, let alone that legendary Manchester United side. So how did they do it? One word. Wenger ball. Yep, I may be cheating a little bit with this as this was less of a great team and more of the case of great management. Great management from Arsenal's greatest ever manager. And look man, you can say what you want, but when context is applied, Mr. Wenger's work from 2006 to 2014 really is underrated. Number 5, Manchester United 2004-2005. So this photo has been doing the rounds quite a bit on social media in recent years, mostly titled something like Once Upon a Time in Manchester United. And I won't lie, whenever I see that picture I kinda laugh a little bit because I remember watching that game live. United lost the game, FA Cup final. A game where, if I'm honest, United should have won by at least 2 goals. But due to Scholes' big toenail not regrowing in time after his last bonding session with his daughter, this crazy team went an entire season without any silverware, despite fielding a fledgling but fierce and freckly fat-necked forward in Wayne Rooney who struck fear in the heart of practically every opposition, a teenage twinkle-toed terrible teeth CR7 who completed the most take-ons in the Premier League that season, and the reliable rectangular frame of the ready and ruthless Ruud van Nistelrooy who ran rampant and scored the most goals in the Champions League that season. Not to mention the likes of Keane, Scholes and Giggs were still hanging about. I mean, just look at that midfield alone. Ronaldo, Keane, Scholes, Giggs. This midfield won nothing. Madness. But what they did manage to do though is they finished with the second most goals in the Champions League group stages, made it to the final and semi-final of both domestic cup competition, losing via a penalty shootout in one as I said, and by a very late winner to arguably the best team in Europe in the other. And to make things a little more painful, not only did they destroy the Arsenal side that robbed them of the FA Cup in the FA Cup final, they slapped them up multiple times throughout that season even outside that, famously ending their 49 game unbeaten streak in late October and topping them in legit one of the greatest games I've ever seen in early February. Man, that was a good watch, even if it meant that I had to endure listening to my Arsenal fanmate explaining why he suddenly hated John O'Shea. Regardless man, those were the days. Number 4, Borussia Dortmund 2012-2013. I think I'm right in saying that of all the entries on this list, this may actually be the best team. A team who, if you looked at all the signals back then, you probably would have assumed that they were only going to get better. They didn't have a great 09-10, but then made additions in the form of Shinji Kagawa and Robert Lewandowski, and ended up winning the Bundesliga in 10-11. But that wasn't enough. They wanted more. So they then made further additions in the form of Ivan Perisic and Ilkay Gundogan, and ended up winning the double in 11-12. But even that wasn't enough. They wanted more. So they made a further addition the following summer in the form of one Marco Reus. And I think it's fair to say the intentions for 12-13 were crystal clear. And yet somehow, this low-key super team, despite topping the UCL group of death and having some notable victories over some big names along the way, finished the season with nothing. Though in all fairness, they were quite unlucky in Europe, losing in the final to domestic rivals Bayern, with the only difference being a solitary penalty. But then when you consider that they were knocked out in the quarterfinals of the domestic cup and finished 25 points off the top in Bundesliga, well, you can judge it in either one of the two ways. You can look from afar and say that a team like Borussia Dortmund, with the relative lack of big names, doing as much as they did was an overachievement in itself. Or if you are someone who was following their upward trajectory in the past few years and indeed expected them to take it to the next level that year, in some ways you may have considered it a bit of a disappointment. But let's be honest, that's being a little cynical. Either way though, sadly for them, that was about as good as it got. Number 3, Barcelona, 2007-2008. So we all remember, or at least have heard of, Real's Galacticos policy, right? Well, if you haven't, no worries, I got you covered. That's a spoiler. But yeah, for some reason, Barca looked at that jumbled mess and thought, yeah, I'll have a bit of that. And yeah, Messi, Eto'o, Henry, Xavi, Iniesta, Deco, Zambrotta, Puyol, Touré, and Ronaldinho equals 0 trophies. Though if we're being fair, just throwing these names out like that doesn't really paint the most accurate of pictures. As I keep saying, context is key. And the context here is, most of these big names just weren't at their peak around this time. Messi wasn't there yet, Touré wasn't there yet, while Deco was slightly past it, Henry was slightly past it, and Dino was so far past it you'll think he was already travelling with a fake passport. And needless to say, had these guys in a hypothetical world come together all at their peak, it could have and probably would have been a completely different story. And there probably wouldn't have been too much coaching needed had this been the case. But for what reality was at the time, turns out what they needed more than anything was proper coaching. Something they'd go on to receive very, very soon. Number 2, Real Madrid, 2003-2004. So what would you man say is worse? Having the front 7 of Xavi, Iniesta, Touré, Ronaldinho, Messi, Henry and Eto'o and still finishing 3rd and making no finals? Or having the front 7 of Zidane, Beckham, Figo, Guti, Ronaldo, Raul and Roberto Carlos and still finishing 4th but making 1 final? I'll tell you, it's close. But here's where they're different, you see. Because like I said, for Barca it was more of the case of not having many players who are in that sweet middle phase of their career. But for Real on the other hand, it was more of, well, just freakish circumstances. Like no joke, these guys were tipped for the treble for over half, if not majority of that season. Starting the league campaign flying, only losing the Copa del Rey final via an extra time winner, and even topping their Champions League group. And while an initial glance at that group won't impress you all that much, but that's only until you realize that Porto actually went on to win the entire tournament that year, and this Real side were the only team to beat them that year. They also finished the league season with the most goals scored, and bear in mind by the way, they did finish 4th, but that was only still 7 points off the top. La Liga was a lot closer back then. And to top all that, they only even finished 7 points off the top because, get this, they lost every single one of their last 5 games. What the fuck happened, man? Number 1, Bayern Munich, 2011-2012. No one was going to top this. They had all the tools to win the treble. They were striving to do so till damn near the very end. Yeah, in the end, inside a month, they finished 2nd place in each and every competition, losing the title race in late April, losing the German Cup on the 12th of May, and exactly a week later, losing the Champions League final on a penalty shootout nonetheless, in their very own stadium. Damn. Well, on the positive side, I guess what they went on to do very shortly afterwards shows that there's always next season, kids. There's always next season. I love this game. And that is that. Agree or disagree? Beats indifference. So what do you think of this list? Are there any other great trophyless seasons from great teams that I've missed out? Let me know in the comments below. And as usual, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Till next time, keep rolling.